So welcome everyone on our webinar today. It's already third webinar hosted by Evidence Prime. And today we will focus on our tool GRADEpro from A to Z. During our last webinar, Why Grade? We have talked about the reasons of why to use Grade methodology for creation of guidelines. And we also introduced briefly our tool GRADEpro, which helps you to conduct this process. We have received a lot of requests to show some practical examples and to dive more in depth into this, into the use of the tool. This is why we have created this webinar, where we will focus on more in detail on the tool, and we will show you practically how to use it. Quickly, I would like to show you some of the rules of our webinar. First of all, this meeting is recorded, and the video recording will be available and sent to all the registered participants after the webinar. And we would like to invite you to ask all your questions at any time of the webinar. You can ask your questions by using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the end of the presentations or at the end of webinar. And in case we don't have time enough to answer all your questions, we will write a short summary, short article, which we will publish online and distribute to you after the event. If you have any technical issues, please raise your hand or contact us in the chat or at webinars@evidenceprime.com. And at the end, after the webinar, you will receive the link to evaluation questionnaire, which we kindly ask you to fill in because it will help us to improve our future events and to produce content which is of interest for you. So today we will focus on several aspects. First of all, we will introduce GRADEpro and show you how to set up your GRADEpro profile. And then we will talk about data management in GRADEpro, where we will show you practical examples of how to use the tool. Next, we will also talk about panel interactions, and we will show you one of our key features, panel voice. And at the end, we will talk about dissemination of recommendations and show you a little sneak peek into production and talk about the new features which are coming out soon. Our first speaker will be our colleague, Justyna Lityńska. She is a junior product manager at Evidence Prime. She provides support to users and takes part in the constant improvement of GRADEpro. She will talk today about GRADEpro in more depth, and she will show us practical examples of how to use the tool. Our second speaker is Artur Nowak. He is a co-founder and CTO of Evidence Prime. He helps the brightest minds answering the most challenging questions in healthcare through his work in the area of artificial intelligence. He will give us a sneak peek into production and show us new features of GRADEpro. I would like to launch a poll to start our webinar to see if you are already familiar with GRADEpro. So please answer the questions if you have ever used the tool already, or if you have conducted a project in GRADEpro. The possible answers are no, I have never used it. I created an account and tested it. I have conducted one project. I have conducted multiple projects. I have used it for other reasons, or what is GRADEpro? I can see that answers are still coming. %80% of you already answered. And 43% of people said that, no, I have never used it, or I have created an account and tested it, 25%. I will show you the results now. So this is a great opportunity today to learn more about the tool and to get familiar with this. I would like to give the floor to Justyna.
So I'm very happy to have you all here. I hope you will learn more about GRADEpro today. The presentation is called GRADEpro from A to Z because I hope to show you today what is the process that you could go through in GRADEpro, what could be your GRADEpro experience, and which features you could be using along the way. So in this presentation, I would like to go through 3 parts. Firstly, through the introduction to GRADEpro. So in general, what it is about and what is the process of account setup and project setup. Then data management in GRADEpro, how data can be entered and assessed using our tools. And finally, the panel interactions. So how can you use GRADEpro to gather feedback from external experts? Beginning with the introduction and setup, the main homepage of our tool is gradepro.org. You can always go there to check out the newest information about our products, about our newest features, new webinars, for example, also. And also you can log in there to the system using the buttons, or you can use them to create an account. When you log in, you always have the possibility to, for example, remember your password if you forgot it. And well, it does happen to everyone. I myself sometimes forget my passwords to various websites, so it is always good to remember it. Or you can use it to create your account. The account creation is very simple. It takes just a few minutes or even less than a minute if you type quickly. You just have to enter your first name and last name, your email address, and your password of choice. And that's it. It can be even faster if you are using the Cochrane, if you are a Cochrane user, because then you can use your Cochrane account as a proxy to create GRADEpro account. The address of GRADEpro as an application is below, so it's gdt.gradepro.org/app. And the upside of this address and of making a bookmark of it when you're using GRADEpro is that this address is accessible offline. So we know that sometimes you are in places where there is bad internet connection, or you are in a plane and you cannot use the internet at all, but then you can continue working with GRADEpro. The changes you introduce will be saved on your computer, and then they will be synchronized with your online database when you regain the internet connection. So this is something that is good to remember and good to use in the future. When you enter GRADEpro, you can find out that it is divided to help you organize your project. The highest level of organization is workspace. So this is a separate compartment of GRADEpro that holds projects related to a separate area of your work, because depending on your affiliations, you may have various areas. There are 3 types of workspaces. First, there's Cochrane Workspace, and this is based on the Revman web integration, which is one of the interesting features that perhaps we can talk more about in the future. There's the personal workspace. So this is area accessible to all GRADEpro users. Every GRADEpro user has their own personal workspace. It is where the free features of GRADEpro are available, and you can use it to have your smaller projects, for example, or to test GRADEpro out before you acquire a paid subscription, or just for academic and training use. This is up to you what you do in your personal workspace. And finally, there are organization workspaces. These are for groups that acquire subscriptions for enterprise projects and for team projects. And the more advanced features are available, paid features that allow you to create more complex projects. You can always find information in GRADEpro when you are lost. One of the main places for that is the help button at the top of your screen. So you can access the Grade handbook there. So more information about the Grade domain and how to follow its rules. Also, there is the button for feedback. So we can always send question to us, which we will answer to help you guide your project. There are also settings. So GRADEpro is available in a number of languages, that is to make it more accessible to users all around the world. Finally, there is also the user menu, where you can, for example, change your workspace and move from personal projects to the projects of your team. And of course, log out when you decide that it is enough for the day and you want to have a break. Every workspace is organized in the same way, and it is also very simple. You have the list of your projects, so those that you have created so far, those that you are invited to. Then there are project invitations. When someone wants to share their project with you, they can do it in two ways. You can invite someone so they can work together with you on a single copy of the project. So you work together, everyone, you can see each other's work, and then you are invited, you receive an invitation. Or you can share project copy, so send someone a copy of your project so they can work on it on their own and go into separate directions if that's required. So those invitations and copies will land there. And of course, the buttons to create a new project to begin new work. In terms of how GRADEpro is connected to the Grade domain, the design of GRADEpro was to reflect the guideline structure. So in Grade domain, you create recommendations, which then taken together create a single guideline, a single set of recommendations. So each project in GRADEpro is a single guideline, is equivalent to a single guideline. And within this project, you have a list of questions. You see the questions you created before, and you see the buttons to create new questions, and the menu on the left-hand side, which allows you to access various parts of your project. How this relates to the guideline structure, that's very simple. Every question is equivalent to one recommendation. Of course, it doesn't need to become recommendation in the end, but every question can potentially be a recommendation in the future. So to sum up, the structure of GRADEpro means that you have your own account. In this account, you can have various workspaces, your free personal workspace or project workspace if you are in a larger group. In a workspace, you have various projects, which are equivalents of guidelines, and within the projects, there are the PICO questions, which are equivalent to recommendations. And that's how this tree goes, and that's where you have your work organized. To begin a new project, it's again very simple. Just one click creates a project for you that you can populate with data. You just need to enter its name. One of the first steps you might want to take in your project is to invite your collaborators if you are not working alone, and this can be done in the team section. So to do this, you can simply enter the email address and personal data of the person you want to invite if they have a GRADEpro account. If not, they will have to create it first, of course, because you will need to invite them in GRADEpro. Alternatively, if you are using a paid subscription, you will see just a list of your collaborators, because in terms of those, it is important that such projects are not accessed by someone who is not supposed to see them, by someone from outside the team. So only those team members can be invited to this project in the first place. There are three types of users in a GRADEpro project. There are admins, so those are people who create the projects, manage them, manage the team of the project, and they can access all of the project elements. There are researchers, so those are people who are focused mostly on entering the data and turning the results of your systematic reviews. So for example, they cannot access the team section, they cannot manage the team members because they should focus precisely on the data. And there are panel members, so those are people who cannot access the project at all. And they are only answered to forms which are sent via email. So this gives them less access, but also on the other hand, they don't need to have GRADEpro accounts and the GRADEpro training. So if you just need expertise of these people, if you just need their feedback, you don't need to have them go through a GRADEpro training. You can just send them a message, and they will answer to your questions. And if you have any questions, I will of course answer them after the presentation. You can always put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, or in the chat if you cannot find the Q&A section. When you have a team ready, you can see their names, you can see their access level, whether they are admins or researchers, and whether they accepted your invitation or not, and whether they will be members of your panel of experts. And again, those people wouldn't need GRADEpro accounts if they only are the panel experts. You can also manage conflict of interest to make your projects more transparent. So there are various forms of conflict of interest available, and you can check who has already completed them or not. Those are simple forms sent via email that people can fill in. And once they complete them, you can see the results. So you can see whether they entered any interest they received in the past or currently. You can also preview the whole form if you see it fit. And based on these answers, you can mark whether or not they are conflicted with particular questions. If you think they are conflicted, you can mark it, and then they will be automatically excluded from the process regarding those questions. So just to keep the transparency and that everything is not biased. So this was the basic project setup that you might want to go through, and then comes the main part, the data management. So to enter data in your GRADEpro project, you need to create a question. There are two main kinds of questions in GRADEpro: management and diagnostic. Management questions follow the format of should intervention versus comparison be used for health problem and or population. So this could be, as a very simple example, should vitamin C versus placebo be used for common cold? Or, of course, you will go into much more detail when you have much more complex projects regarding various health conditions and populations. Those are the management questions. There are also diagnostic questions, which are used to assess the quality of various tests, of diagnostic tests. And yes, this is the second type of the questions. So when you create a management question, and in this example, this is the question from breast cancer guidelines, courtesy of the European Commission team. So in this case, they were asking whether organized mammography should be used for detection of breast cancer in women aged 40 to 44. And this is the question they are asking. Now they need to somehow measure what's the difference between having an organized mammography screening and not having it. This has to be measured with outcomes, which will be rows of the table. So the table here has two main parts. So there's the certainty assessment part, where the quality of evidence will be assessed according to the GRADE domain, and the summary of findings part, when your results from screening from your systematic review will be entered. So a new outcome is added in a very simple way. You just click the button and you can enter the name. You can enter the name of the outcome. You can enter the length of follow-up if it's applicable in your case. You can choose the type of data. So if it's dichotomous, a yes or no type of event. So for example, mortality, death, or no death, or headache, and continuous data, which can have a wider range of results. So for example, blood pressure, which can have many different values. There are also narrative outcomes available. So if you have no concrete numeric data, you can just describe it in words. You can also choose what type of data this was taken from. So whether you pull the results across numerous studies or just look at from a single study, for example. Once you have such empty outcome, you can populate it with numerical data. So enter the number of events, the number of patients, and the relative effect. Once you put those three values, the absolute effect is calculated automatically by GRADEpro. So this is something quite useful. You don't have to enter it manually every time. Then comes the main part of GRADEpro experience, I would say, the quality assessment. So the certainty assessment. So there are four main elements of this: the risk of bias, inconsistency, indirectness, and imprecision. And you grade them on a scale defined by the GRADE method, and then the overall certainty is calculated automatically at the end. If you are unsure on how to proceed with certainty assessment, there are tools that can help you. So there are, for example, assessment tools that usually create an auxiliary table that you can use to answer auxiliary questions, and by looking at the results of those questions, you can reach the final conclusion, what should be the final assessment of this particular criterion. In this case, we see the table for the risk of bias, and a similar tool is available for indirectness. So again, this will be a table with auxiliary questions you can answer, and this way reach the final conclusion for this particular criterion. There are also tooltips that can answer the question of what this particular criterion is about, what should be taken into consideration when assessing it. And such tooltips are available not only here, they're scattered across the whole of GRADEpro. So whenever you see this icon, you can click on it to have more information about a particular element of GRADEpro. There are also various versions of the tables available. So this is the grade evidence table, and there are two kinds of such tables available. There are also free versions of summary of findings table, which is the format used, for example, by the Cochrane Society. There is also the interactive summary of findings table. It is especially useful in terms of showing your results to a wider audience. So, for example, there is the option to enter plain language statements to explain results in plain words for the wider public. Once you complete the evidence table, you may want to proceed to the next part of a PICO question, to the recommendation tab, which is created from 3 elements. First is the 12 criteria of the ETD designed by the grade domain. So those are the 12 questions you have to answer, you have to judge to create a recommendation from the data you have. And some of the questions are focused mostly on the data in the evidence table. So for example, the desirable effects and undesirable effects of your intervention. But there are also those that refer to the patient values or the acceptability of patients or the feasibility of the solution you want to propose. So this is the assessment part, or marked with the letter A in GRADEpro. The next part is the type of recommendation, where you can decide on the strength and direction of your recommendation. And well, naturally, this is called the recommendation part, marked with the letter R. Finally, there is the section where you can enter the exact text of your recommendation together with its justification and other considerations and remarks. So this part is called conclusions and marked with the letter C. Every criterion in the ETD, every of the 12 criteria is constructed in the same way. So you have a middle column where you can summarize your research evidence. This can be done either with words or by inserting the evidence table with the criteria that are, with the outcomes that are most important for this particular criterion. You can add additional considerations. So for example, if there was any discussion to create this element. And then comes the judgment, so the answer to the question posed by the particular criterion. And it is not easy to answer such a question, especially when it's in terms of healthcare decisions. So there are elements that you can use to help you out with this. When you make all those decisions, they are summarized in a table, and this summary can be helpful when you want to make the final decision on the recommendation. You can also use the element that is proposed by GRADEpro, the detailed judgments. So again, similarly to evidence table, this is an auxiliary table with questions that you can answer, and this way reach the final judgment for this particular criterion. This is one of the options. The other option, and this is the next stage of our presentation, is to consult a panel of experts. And now we reach the level of panel interactions with the first feature, and one of the most important being the panel voice feature. Panel voice is a feature that can help you consult with the panel of experts regarding the recommendation, regarding the 12 criteria of the ETD, regarding the strength and direction of your recommendation, and then the final remarks. This can be done in a very simple process. So first you complete the ETD, the evidence to decision table, with the results you got from your systematic review. Then you can send it together with the help of GRADEpro to the panel of experts, who will provide their feedback, their answers to the judgment questions, and their comments if applicable. And you will receive those answers in GRADEpro. They will be summarized. You will see the results, the numeric results. And with those results, you can now go 2 ways. If the results are not agreed. If people have different opinions and there is no consensus, you can resend the survey. This time, for example, narrowing down some options to make the decision easier for the panel. And if the decision is finally reached, if there is consensus, you can move on to issuing a recommendation from this particular pickle question. What this looks like in GRADEpro, I will show you now. So there is a separate feature, a separate section for that, where you see the list of the questions in your project. You see, for example, which ones were already sent, which ones were not, or perhaps some were already closed. You see how many people answered the questions and the options to either close the voting if you think that all the answers were provided, or send if it's something new. When you send a new survey, you go through 4 steps. First step is to decide which part you are sending. So one of those, either one or a few or all of the 3 parts: assessment, type of recommendation, and conclusions, as I was showing before. And you can decide whether or not to use the pre-selected judgments option. So I was mentioning that sometimes there can be some disagreement between members. Sometimes you need to narrow down the options. The standard option is for the panel to have free choice of answers. So in this case, for example, with the question, is the problem a priority, the panel member can mark any of the answers available. They can say no, they can say yes, they can say don't know, anything they wish. But perhaps there was already some discussion and there is disagreement and you want to narrow down the options. Then you can use the pre-select judgment option. So this way you mark the answer before, and panel members only answer whether they agree or disagree with your suggestion. If they disagree, they are compelled to provide comment for why they are disagreeing, to make the discussion easier and to make the panel reach the consensus earlier and faster. And time is of the essence, of course, because we are answering important questions in terms of healthcare. Then when you choose which parts to send and whether or not to use pre-select judgments, you can choose whether you want to include any other questions, because you may want to send more than one in a single batch of survey. This is okay. Then you can choose what should be the message that the people will receive together with the link. So you can edit the text if you want to add more information that you think is relevant. You can add a due date so that people know there's a deadline. You will add your email so that they can contact you if they have any questions. And there is option to attach files, so you can attach some instructions or scientific papers, anything you think is necessary for people to go through the process smoothly. And the final stage is to choose which members the survey will go to. And as you can see, if someone was conflicted with this particular question, they are automatically excluded. You can include them if you want to, but this has to be done separately. By design, they are excluded to make sure that everything is transparent and not biased. They then receive the survey. So in the form that I was showing you before, they answer the questions, they answer all of the questions they are sent, they submit the survey, and then you see their answers in your GRADEpro. You see their who answered how, and you can view the results either by numbers or by percentages, whichever you prefer. And this way you can see what's the opinion. So here, for example, majority says no is the answer. So that's what you could mark when you are having this, when you are using this feature. So that was one of the main ways you can engage panel of members, but it's not the only one. You can also engage them before you start the project, because every guideline has recommendations, has questions to answer, but you can sometimes want to have some more people contribute the questions. You want to have more ideas. You want to brainstorm with them. What should be the questions that are to be answered? And if you have too many questions and you don't have enough time or resources to answer them all, you want to narrow down to see which are the most important. And that's where the questions and outcomes generation features come in. So you create an initial draft, so the list of questions you think are most relevant. You send them to the panel, and they add their own options, their own ideas, so that you see more options than you've seen before. You see this completed list, and you can edit it. So, for example, if there are duplicates, you can remove them, or you can correct some typos, and then you can send them to the panel for prioritizing. So the experts mark which questions are the most important and which are of lesser importance, so that you can categorize them into 3 categories. So the questions to be answered, the questions to be answered perhaps at a later date, but not in this particular project, and questions to be removed from the project because they are not relevant. And finally, you can send this list with categorized questions for the panel to approve your choices or disapprove if they think this should be done otherwise. In GRADEpro, it looks very simple. So you add questions, send them to the panel members who can add their own questions. You see the list of all the questions that people sent. And again, you can edit those questions if it's needed. Then the panel assesses the priority on a scale from 1 to 9. So they can mark priority for each question, or say that they don't know, or leave a comment. And then based on this priority, the system, the GRADEpro, automatically categorizes the questions. So if the final assessment is between 7 and 9, this question is automatically marked as to be answered. If it's between 6 and 4, then it is to be listed, so to be answered at a later time. And below 3, it's to be excluded, not answered in this particular project. This is suggested by GRADEpro, but of course you can change it if you believe something should be marked otherwise. And then you send it to the panel. They see which questions are to be answered in your project, which are to be listed and which are to be excluded. They can mark whether they approve or not. And once they approved, then you can automatically transfer those questions into your GRADEpro project so that you don't have to enter them manually, which is another upside, and you can save time on this. So to sum up the process that you can have in GRADEpro, it begins with account and project setup. So you create your account, you create your projects, you invite your team, then you brainstorm the questions and outcomes together with the panel of experts. When the questions are ready and outcomes are entered, you enter the data you have gathered in the systematic review. You assess the data according to the grade domain. With this assessed data, you can complete the ETD table and then answer the judgments either yourself or with panel voice, and then issue a recommendation based on those judgments. And this process depends on you. So I can imagine that, for example, you might want to skip the team and the team related elements if your project is very small and you are working only with a narrow group of collaborators. Or you may want to skip the ETD and recommendation parts if you just want to create an evidence table and assess the evidence. It depends on you to what extent you are using GRADEpro, just so that you know that you have this wide variety of options you can use, and it is up to you which ones you focus on. Finally, when you have completed this whole path, you may want to publish your data, to share it with the world, because that's how you do it. That's why you do it in the first place. And this can be done in a few ways. The most basic one is to simply export the table. Whenever you see the export icon in the top right corner, this means that table can be exported. It can be exported in a number of formats, including the Word format, HTML, PDF that you can include in your publications later on. Or you can choose to publish in the database of GRADE ETDs and guidelines. For short, it's called the DBEP. So you just enter the dissemination feature of GRADEpro, the online database part. You can publish any of your questions. And once you do, and once we accept this publication, it will be accessible to anyone who enters the DBEP. They will see your question, your PICO question, the recommendation you did, the text of recommendation, additional remarks, and the tables you have completed in the course of action. So this database is available on our homepage through the ETDs and guidelines button, and that's something that anyone can access and anyone can publish in it, whether they are a free account user or from paid subscription. So if you want to learn more about GRADEpro, because still, even with half an hour of presentation, I did not manage to say everything, you can go to our homepage at gradepro.org. As I mentioned, you can go to our knowledge base, where you can see articles about the technical rules of using GRADEpro. You can contact us at support@evidenceprime.com if you need any help with using GRADEpro, or sales if you want to purchase the subscription for you and your team. There's also the evidenceprime.com, the homepage of our company, where you can see more information about webinars, about our other tools. And last but not least, you can wait a few minutes when you will see the presentation of my colleague Artur, who will say about other options of disseminating your work with the use of GRADEpro. Other than that, thank you for today's presentation, and I give the floor back to Claudia.
Thank you, Justyna. This was a great presentation. We did receive a lot of questions, and I see that Artur and Anya are answering them in the Q&A section. So everybody who would like to see the questions, you can open the Q&A and see the open questions which are still to be answered, and already answered questions with the provided response. Perhaps I will ask you one question now, and then we will move on to the next presentation. So there is a question: is there a GRADEpro platform for incorporating evidence from qualitative studies?
Okay, thank you, Taiwo, for this question. So in general, GRADEpro can be used to assess any type of data that you wish. So first, if nothing that you see is useful for you, if nothing that you see answers to the question that you have, you can always use the narrative outcome option. So to describe your outcome in words. So this is something that is quite often used by people who do only the qualitative work. So that's the most common option for it. If anything else is needed, you can always contact us, and either we will find an existing feature for you, or we will put it on the list of future features to be published, because, well, GRADEpro is a work in progress. Evidence-based medicine is evolving, and so is GRADEpro.
That's true. So please feel free still to ask any questions, and we will for sure have some more time at the end of our presentation. And now let's give the floor to Artur.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Thank you, Justyna, for giving us this very, I would say, short and but informational introduction to GRADEpro. And in my presentation, I would like to cover just one tiny bit of what GRADEpro is about, but also a very important one. So after the hard work that Justyna presented, creating evidence tables, creating recommendations, we are not done yet. We need to publish this somehow, or more generally, disseminate these outputs so they can be implemented in practice. So far, GRADEpro really focused on producing outputs that were directly based on individual recommendations. I will give you a couple of examples of these in the next slides so we can better understand what we mean by saying recommendation-based derivatives. But while we still believe that this is the most powerful strategy for knowledge translation, our users often need to create a text document that provides some context for these outputs. So this is why we are launching a completely new publication module in GRADEpro that merges these two paradigms. And during this session, I will explain how it works. So just to give you a couple of examples of what we have right now, we have interactive presentations for tables, which take you from this, which was presented by Justyna, to something like this, which is an interactive format that you can put on your website or you can link to it. And it allows users to explore the evidence, to interact with it, to choose different levels of baseline risks, and to explore the evidence in more visual and attractive way. We also have a very similar set of modules for recommendations, where you can reuse the data that is already entered in GRADEpro, for instance, in evidence to decision tables, but you can package this information in much more visually attractive way that can be printed, shared online as a link, or embedded within a web page. We also have decision aids for shared decision making. This is something that you can also create with GRADEpro, and it can help patients and clinicians to make decisions based on the individual circumstances, especially where you have conditional recommendations. So within these decision aids, you can provide some content that is written in plain language. It can be understood by the general population. You can let patients assess their values. You can let them review the research results, also presented in an accessible way. And by using these tools, you can facilitate patients to be more empowered in their decisions and in the end, improve their health. So the ultimate product for this recommendation-centric publishing is something we call recommendation maps. So they take the idea of using recommendation as a unit of information even farther, and they allow you to search, filter, and compare recommendations coming from different guidelines or even different organizations. So, for example, in this screenshot, you can see that there are 10 WHO recommendations that cover prevention of tuberculosis in people living with HIV. And I can then click this cell to see them all, explore them in more detail. We currently have 3 publicly available recommendation maps that use our technology. This is the recommendation map from WHO on tuberculosis. We also have a map of key messages on tuberculosis from GRADEpro. And the biggest one is the COVID recommendation map, currently hosting more than 4,500 recommendations from more than 300 guidelines from different organizations. Here you can see an example of how these recommendations are presented as a list that you can filter and search within. And here you can see how these different outputs from GRADEpro that Justyna and I presented previously come together as part of a single recommendation page. So here you can see that based on single recommendation, you can create a very comprehensive presence for this research. And then the new addition that we introduce now is a new text editor that enables you to create some text that provide context to these recommendations. So within this text editor, you can define any sort of chapter structure that you need. This text editor also features comments, tracking changes, so you can actually work with your group, accepting or rejecting changes from many editors. There are workflows embedded in, so you can mark different sections of this document as either being still in progress or being reviewed. And you can also use the citations by leveraging the references module in GRADEpro. You can include tables, images. This gives you a lot of flexibility in authoring these documents. But what's maybe even more important is that this is not another text editor that is just embedded within GRADEpro. It's very deeply integrated, and for instance, you can insert recommendations or tables from the other modules and link them together. So for instance, from your text, you can create links to individual recommendations. What it enables is that after you publish these documents, you have the chapter structure here with the red border. These chapters, of course, contain all the text that you entered. But at the same time, you also have the recommendations that you created, which you can see here in a green border. Clicking any of these recommendations takes you to a page for a single recommendation that you've already seen in the context of the recommendation maps. So we take these two paradigms together and we create a platform that takes the best of the two worlds. In the platform, we have a dual view of guidelines. You can either explore them by reading them as a document, by exploring their table of contents, but at the same time, you can still use the filters, searches, and also grids to see them from the perspective of single recommendations. What you see here on the screenshots is a platform that has no logo. The SPP here is something that is called a white label product. So this is just a place that waits for your logo, your branding that can be put there. So this creates a multitude of options of how to publish your content, but we are also fully aware that no single group works the same way. So we have some organizations that work with us who are obliged to publish all their work in some journal, and they cannot publish the guideline text elsewhere. So for instances like these, you can export everything that you created in this text editor to a Word file. Some other groups would like to use our publication platform or maybe mobile apps that we provide. But in some cases, they already have a web page and they want to integrate all this content into something that already exists. And for cases like this, we provide something called API or Application Programming Interface for the IT teams at these organizations to integrate the content that you produce in GRADEpro. Thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. I hope that I whet your appetite for learning more about the publication options available in GRADEpro. And I hope that we'll have time in the future webinars to explore this in more detail.
Thank you, Artur, for the presentation. So we have a few more questions in our question and answer. First of all, can GRADEpro be used for systematic reviews of article? And how much useful is it for meta-analysis?
Yes, so looking at the numbers, at our nearly 100,000 users, probably most of them use GRADEpro for systematic reviews. This also reflects let's say the pyramid of evidence, where in general we have more systematic reviews than guidelines. GRADEpro can be used for systematic reviews, mainly for creating evidence tables, and also with interactive presentations based on evidence tables. And now with this publication module that I presented to you, you can also create some sort of a document or the manuscript for the systematic review itself, and either export this to Word for future processing, or you can even publish this with our platform. This in turn enables you to create living systematic reviews. So by hosting these products on a platform, on a web platform, you can update them at any time and provide timestamps, provide the full history of all the versions. To answer the question about the meta-analysis, this is not in the scope of GRADEpro. We are not providing any statistical methods. Most of the time, people use tools like RevMan to do meta-analysis and import results of these statistical models to GRADEpro.
Thank you. Another question for Justyna. Do all systematic reviews require GRADEpro? Do we use GRADEpro only to rate quality of evidences?
Desta, thank you for this question. No one can force you to use GRADEpro for all systematic reviews. However, this is very helpful, especially because I know some people, for example, are using tables created in Word documents or in other external tools. GRADEpro creates those tables for you. They are ready as you begin. You only need to populate them with data, so it just makes the work faster and easier for you, and saves time. And as it saves time, it also saves money. As for the question if GRADEpro can only be used for rating the quality of evidence, no, it can help you organize your work. Because it also provides elements that I couldn't show today. So, for example, checklists of the guideline creation process, and it can guide you through the process after the data is assessed. So through the creation of recommendation together with the panel, then the publication, as Artur was showing. So all the steps after the meta-analysis can be done with GRADEpro.
Thank you, Justyna. There is another question for you. Do you scientifically review the outputs before publishing on your site?
We have to remember that here at GRADEpro, of course, we are doing our best to understand the GRADE domain and to accommodate our system, our software to it, but we are not GRADE domain specialists. So I am one of the people who are reviewing the outputs that are to be published on our pages, and I cannot be an expert in every domain that people create recommendations in. So I check whether I can check, for example, whether the authors are provided, which is quite an important thing to do, because then the users can try to contact you afterwards regarding your data. I check whether the quality assessment has been done, because publishing empty tables is not something that anyone would do. So mostly it means, for example, that someone made a mistake, and just those I would say administrative elements. Whether the data is scientifically correct is up to you and up to scientific community, who can then contact you and point out, for example, some room for improvement. So that's how it's done.
Thank you, Justyna. I also saw there was some questions on collaboration with future webinars. Definitely, we encourage this communication. You can always contact us at webinars@evidenceprime.com to talk about future events. There is another question from Claudia. Hello, I am a bit confused on how to fill the information on single arm analysis. In my case, in an analysis on RCT and NRSI on a specific treatment, survival. Artur, you'd like to answer this?
Yeah, so for single arm analysis, especially, we have a couple of different study designs within GRADEpro, and most of the time, if you have a single arm analysis, there is still, especially for survival, there is, let's say, let's say survival curve that compares this with let's say, the standard treatment or something like this. So this is something that would probably need to be discussed in detail, either over email or maybe even with our, let's say, scientific colleagues at GRADE Working Group. But in general, people are doing things like this in GRADEpro. So please reach out to support@gradepro.org, and we can and we'll try to help you, at least by forwarding your inquiry to our colleagues.
Thank you. Another question for you, Justyna. Can you assess several outcomes at the same time, or you have to assess each outcome separately?
So thank you, Gada, for this question. Every outcome has to be assessed separately. There is no option to assess them together because, well, every outcome is a separate entry to the table, and they can have different studies they come from, and this way the assessment would be different. However, this doesn't take a lot of time. As you could see on the presentation, it's just a few clicks. So if you are certain that the assessment should be repeated for the below options, then it takes just a few seconds to click on it. So that's very simple.
Perfect. I can see also there is a question in the chat. What is the difference between the Cochrane support summary and recommendation panel list? Can one of you answer on this question?
I'm not sure what Cochrane support summary is or who they are, so maybe you can provide more details. Maybe ask another question. Yeah, but I also see that there is a question from the same person asking whether GRADEpro can be used in scoping reviews, and this is something that I can answer. So in general, the let's say methodology for conducting the literature review should not, let's say, influence the possibility of using GRADEpro. It's more dependent on really the type of outcomes that you extract and measure. So in GRADEpro, you can still create narrative outcomes. So even if your scoping review does not produce any quantitative evidence that can be then presented as dichotomous or continuous outcomes, you can still do this in GRADEpro.
Thank you. Maybe we can ask one more question, a follow-up question on Gada's questions. What if certain outcome was assessed by different measures? Do we treat it as one outcome, or we treat each outcome measure separately?
Most of the time, I will also answer this. You would like to in some way convert this into one outcome. Here, we are actually being a little bit out of our, let's say, comfort zone, because this is, something that most of the time we delegate to our colleagues at GRADE Working Group. But in general, the idea here is that for decision making, you need to have some sort of a single estimate for one outcome. Having multiple outcomes that really are the different measurements of the same thing is not helpful in making sense out of it. So you need some process to kind of merge them together. But of course, this probably would require more in-depth answer.
Thank you for that. And we still have a few questions. So we will probably write up an article where we answer all the questions and we sum up our discussion. And these are our social media channels. So follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you can contact us through our email, as I mentioned already. And yes, I wanted to thank you very much, Artur and Justyna, for your presentations. And thanks to all the participants for your active participation. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to receive any updates for the next webinars and our future events. Thank you. you.